Well, good morning and welcome to Live from Currituck Extension. My name is Chris Blaha, and I am Currituck County's Agriculture Technician and Master Gardener Coordinator. Today's episode of Live from Currituck Extension, we're going to focus on weeds and problem weeds in your beds and in your lawns. And I know this is going to be a hot topic after all this rain and the temperatures that we've had. And the bright sunshine immediately after the rain. So if you haven't yet, check your beds, and it might be a good time to go ahead and take control of those. But before we begin, make sure that you subscribe to our channel and click the bell to receive notifications. That will let you know when we post new videos or we go live. If you have any questions during our class, type them in the chat and we will answer them as we go. If you're watching the recording of this class and you have questions, you can email me or call me later. Our information can be found in the description below. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to talk about, of course, like I said before, was weeds, or what we're going to discuss today is weeds. And spraying is not the only option for managing weeds. I know a lot of times that's the go-to method, but it really does require an integrated or multi-faceted approach to tackle the weeds and to control them successfully. Spraying is an option, but not the only option. So what is a weed is what we're going to talk about next. And that really depends on your point of view. A weed really is a plant that's out of place. It could be basically it's growing somewhere where it's unwanted. Or it's a nuisance. It interferes with crop production or the aesthetic value of your landscape. Maybe for the optimist, a plant is for whose use has not been yet discovered. And as you can see in the picture right here, this is obviously unwanted plant growth in the gutters, and they're not performing like they should be. So the first thing we're going to discuss are types of weeds. And it's a huge, broad topic. So I've really condensed this lesson down to try, I've shortened it to try to make it fit into the time allotted. So the first thing we're going to talk about are herbaceous plants. And herbaceous plants typically have no woody stems and no bark. They may be annual or perennial. And then you have woody plants, which are your trees, shrubs, and vines, and woody stems with bark persist above ground all year. And it really is just what it says. When you see bark and kind of woody, tough plants, sturdy plants, those are typically what they consider woody plants. And they'll live for some of them up to thousands of years, some pine trees. So the best management begins with knowing what kind of weed you're dealing with. It's very important to understand different kinds of weeds. You don't necessarily have to know the exact type of weed, but you do need to know a few ways of narrowing it down. So the first thing we'll talk about is how to identify herbaceous weeds. And the first thing you want to do is determine the plant type. So is it a grassy weed? Such as all monocots are grassy weeds or sedges. And then you may be it may be an annual or maybe a perennial, as we said before. And dicots are your broadleaf weeds. They'll have two seed leaves when the seed emerges. The first two leaves, it'll have two leaves when it comes out. Unlike a monocot, which only has one elongated leaf when it comes out. They have net-like veins and one or more leaves at the node. They can be opposite or alternate, and they have a branched growth habit. Monocots or grasses are the single seed leaf. So when the seed emerges, when the leaf emerges from the seed, you'll see it just come up as one leaf. The leaf blades have parallel veins, and they only have one leaf at each node. And they're always alternate. So monocots or grasses are always alternate. And the reason you really don't have to focus too much on monocots and dicots as much as you should on grassy weeds and broadleaf weeds. That's really the way it's an easier way to narrow it down. Also, sedges are included in monocots, so they are a grassy weed. And these things are very, very tough around here to get rid of. They'll grow up in your flowers, in the middle of your flowers, through the roots, in your shrubs, and some of them will get quite tall throughout the year. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. They have solid triangular stems. The saying goes, sedges have edges. So that's one way you can remember it. They have grass-like leaves in a cluster of 3, and each points in a different direction, which is kind of interesting. And they're commonly referred to as watergrass or nutgrass. You'll hear that quite a bit. You'll hear nutsedge used quite a bit. Sedges, again, are monocots, and the flowers can be globe-shaped or in clusters like sparklers. The leaves extend from the flower, and they're more common in heavy, wet soils, and they are warm season annuals and perennials. So as we said before, the first thing you're going to want to do is ID the weed. Really, you need to know whether it's a grassy weed, a sedge, or a broadleaf. That's the 3 categories you really need to know as a homeowner. And that, like I said, that's where you're going to start. And one of the questions you always get is just, how do I get rid of it? How to get rid of a weed. You never really get rid of these weeds. You're only trying to control them. And the best way to do that is through an integrated weed management system. And all of this can be found on in Chapter 6 of the Extension Gardener Handbook, and that can be found on NC State's website. So next we'll talk about a little bit about weed biology, so you can kind of understand why these weeds or how these weeds propagate themselves, and that'll kind of help you formulate a plan for your yard and your flower beds. So, of course, seeds, the annuals, biennials, and perennials, they'll reproduce from seed. Some plants will do. Some weeds use stolons and rhizomes, such as Bermuda grass, and there's a picture of that down in the lower part of your screen. And then others use bulbs and tubers. Those are always going to be perennials, and they'll come back. Like perennials will come back every single year. So perennial root systems, I touched a little bit about it before, but the simple one is a clump forming, and they reproduce by seeds, such as a dandelion. And then you have spreading forms, which reproduce on rhizomes and stolons. And that's typically you'll see Bermuda grass is depicted in the picture here. And the others are tubers and bulbs, such as nutsedge. So spreading perennial tubers and rhizomes, and you can see here that this is the mother plant of nutsedge here on the left-hand side of your screen, and then the rhizome, and then the daughter plant to follow. And these roots are very tender, so even when you pull these out of the ground, it's going to be a constant thing. You're never going to get rid of these, because those little fibrous roots that you see there, they tend to break off, and when they break off, they're just going to produce another daughter plant right away. And we'll talk a little bit about perennials. They have a lot of stored energy in the root system, and they require multiple treatments to kill. Herbicides, mowing, pruning, and even hand pulling all together to kill these. And in this picture here, it is Florida betony. You can see the tubers here are they're very deep, and they're tough to pull out. So you're probably going to have to dig these out. And if they break off, they're just going to, produce another plant and probably get stronger. And I included this picture of Greenbriar roots. I'm not sure, a lot of people probably don't see them from this point of view, but the thorns and things that grow up in the middle of your shrubs or in the middle of your flowers, this is what's underground. And that's why it's important to control these, because think about the amount of nutrients and water and things that these absorb and take from your plants. So, and not to mention crowding out the roots, and eventually they will kill the plant that they form in. So that said, just make sure you remove them. The picture now that came on your screen, that's probably what most of you are familiar with seeing that's growing through your shrubs. And they do have a really nasty thorn on them. So when you're removing these, make sure you wear the proper protection equipment. So as we said before, weed management is going to require an integrated approach, prevention, cultural control, mechanical control, and chemical control. So one way to prevent weeds is not to bring them in. And you'll see this a lot of times at nurseries, or, if you get plants from friends, especially, a lot of people are not good about even pulling the weeds in their containers. But as seed, root pieces, or small plants, they'll come from all kinds. They'll come from people. They'll come from dirty equipment and tools. And also, you can also spread parasitic problems and fungal problems with dirty equipment and tools. So always take the time to disinfect your tools. And infested topsoil, mulch, compost, and plant material. Folks, this is the biggest one here, and this is why our master gardeners do not use, they only use basically stuff that's treated or potting soil that's treated. They don't use anything that's not treated, because if you get one fungal problem in your soil, well, then it affects all of your plants that you're growing. So don't bring the weeds in. Remove the top layer of soil on weedy if your pots have a lot of weeds in them. So some ways to preventing weeds, it's harder to stop, is wind, adjacent property. I've got a terrible person next to me that just does not take care of their yard, and I constantly get weed seeds blowing over from their yard. But that's just, part of what you have to do to kind of control it, is pay attention to those problems and those issues that are around you. Also, visitors, human and animal traffic, they can stick to the fur or bird droppings, and birds certainly are the culprit for a lot of spreading a lot of these weeds, because they'll eat the seed and then they'll poop it out and it fertilizes it. So a lot of times they'll sit in the trees or the shrubs, and what happens. It grows right out in the middle of the shrub, and then you've got a problem. So try to address those weeds when they're young. They're a whole lot easier to manage when they're young. And as you can see, the top, the burrweed, these things love to stick in animal fur. And on the bottom, you've got trampweed, which loves to blow in the wind, kind of like dandelion seeds. They'll blow and then scatter all throughout your yard. Another prevention technique is mulch. Mulch is absolutely essential in your flower beds to keep weeds down. And there's lots of different things you can mulch with: straw, you can mulch with bark, and with some plantings you can use rock. The difficult thing with rock is it's very hard to amend your soil or add organic material, which is important in a lot of our areas with the sandy soil that we have. So your mulches and things, they're only going to block, or they're only going to prevent annuals, and the way they do that is to block light. So the more you disturb your soil, the more you're allowing light down to those seeds, and they can germinate. You need to at least mulch with 3 inches of organic mulch, and landscape fabrics rarely are worth the effort. They do not keep out perennial weeds. They are essential if you're using gravel or rocks as a mulch. And only because they will not allow the rock to sink down in the ground. You'll be constantly refreshing your rock if you do not put fabric down first. So next we're going to talk about mechanical methods. And this little tool that you're seeing here on your screen is called a scuffle hoe. These things work really well for plants, especially for people who have issues bending down constantly and back pain like I do. These scuffle hoes can really save you a lot of time. But you really need to get these, target the young annual weeds with this. So you don't want to let them get too big, and you certainly don't want to let your weeds go to seed, because then your problem just magnifies. They are often used in vegetable gardens, because people, especially in vegetable gardens, people don't want to use any kind of chemical or spray or pre-emergent or anything like that. And they cultivate as shallow as possible to prevent bringing up new seed. So you don't want to bring up fresh soil and new seed. You want to skim right along the surface. And this does propagate perennial weeds. So just understand that, and it's just integrated in part of your management process. So some more mechanical methods will be pruning and mowing. Mowing is extremely important to do on a regular basis. This keeps your weeds from going to seed and then further spreading. So if you were to mow, if your dandelions go to seed, what happens. You've got thousands more dandelions around. So cut back perennial weeds, and frequently to reduce energy storage. And see who gets tired first with that. Many seed weeds adapt to mowing and grow sideways, and they will seed from the side. So even with mowing, you're still going to get propagation of these weeds. If the weeds get too big, use a bagger to catch the clippings. I don't recommend using a bagger most of the time, because you want to You want to mulch or compost those grass clippings back into your lawn for the nutrient and organic benefits of it. The other mechanical method is hand weeding. Of course, it's labor intensive, but it can be therapeutic. I don't typically find weeding therapeutic. Some people do. They're good for small annual weeds. You can do it fairly quickly. It's not very effective on perennials unless very vigilant. It does reduce the energy storage, but it's often used in mixed ornamental plantings. And make sure to get the roots when you get the plant. It's not always possible, especially when the ground is dry. But if you get out there now after the big rain like today, you'll be able to pull all these weeds up very easily. So next, we're going to talk about cultural methods. And this is all, like I said, this is all part of integrated pest management. These are all different techniques that you'll use and incorporate all of them into a management practice. So first, you're going to begin with a weed-free planting area. That's the most important. If you start out with weeds, you're going to end up, it's going to be a losing battle or endless battle. So make sure that you treat all perennial weeds before planting. And it may take months or even years to eradicate some of them. So as you can see in the picture here, this is the Florida Betony again. And you can see how long these tubers, these rattlesnake parts get. And it looks just like almost like a rattlesnake. So next we'll talk about some more cultural methods, and of course plant spacing is a big one. You want these plants touching at maturity, so you don't want to plant stuff too close, and you'll constantly have pest problems. And begin with bigger plants if possible. The bigger the better. The bigger ones you can get, the better. The more healthy they'll be and resilient they'll be. And use transplant versus seeds when possible. Give desired plants best possible conditions and possible for optimum growth. So prepare the soil well, make sure you add a lot of organic material into the soil and maintain fertility. And that will help you maintain fertility. The more organic material you have in the soil, the more it can hold the nutrients into the soil or slowly distribute them to your plants, which is optimal. You can add your salt-based fertilizers, but they typically go right through the sandy soil here. So the more organic material you can get in there, the better. I can't emphasize that enough. And water only desirable plants. So you don't want to water all of your weeds. If you have a big open area of bed, you don't want to necessarily water that area. So you can use soaker hoses. You can use really a lot of things, drip irrigation, soaker hoses, or you can hand water it if you have a small area. Also, you can use cover crops. This is a very effective thing. You can also do this in containers. I use this all the time. If I have a Meyer lemon tree and I've got a sedum planted in the, low growing ground cover sedum that's planted in the pot with it. And it gives it an aesthetic value also, because the sedum hangs over the sides of the pot and gives it a contrasting color to the pot. And also you've got the different textures from the lemons and the tree there. It's very interesting to do that, and it does keep the weeds out. And you can still fertilize these plants without burning them. Osmocote is one great fertilizer of many that does not burn. So that is a good one to use. And using ground covers is similar to mulching. It blocks the light. But you must eliminate all perennial weeds first, or you'll be constantly battling those weeds in that ground cover. So those people that tell you ground covers are maintenance free, that is not true. And choose your plants carefully, adapted to the site, and will thrive to provide dense, rapid cover. Believe it or not, the strawberries make a really interesting ground cover, and it gives you an edible aspect to your landscaping. So next, we'll talk a little bit about cultural methods in turf. And weeds the best thing is to have a dense turf or a dense, thick lawn. And because weeds are going to take advantage of any weak spot you have in your lawn, and they're going to poke through. So there's already seeds preloaded in the soil and ready to go. And as soon as they get light and water, they're going to be germinating. So establish dense turf, prepare the soil, and add compost for that organic material. Fertilize with lime based on a soil test result. So don't just go and throw fertilizer and lime down without getting your soil tested. You should have that tested every 2 years. And if you need more information on that, you can contact me at the office, or you send me an email, which can be found in the description below. Fertilizer timing based on turf type. Make sure that you refer to NC State's research-based turf files, and that will tell you everything you need to know and give you schedules for your turf type of what to use. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Somebody's already got the schedules made. You just have to log in and print them off. And if you can't and you need a schedule, you can come up here and I can print one off and give it to you. And aerate the soil if compacted. That's also very important. So mowing at the correct height, you want to keep that mowed. If you scalp it, again, you're opening up an area for the seeds to be able to grow and for water to get in. And herbicides, remember this, herbicides are a short-term management. If you use all of the techniques that we've discussed, herbicides really, you won't have to use those every single year. And the more you use them, the less effective they get. So you're really your local weeds will build up an immunity or somewhat of an immunity to these herbicides, and likewise you're also harming the environment and pests by overuse of herbicides. So next we'll go into types of herbicides, and herbicides they comprise about 50% of all pesticides on most garden center shelves. You have pre-emerge and post-emerge, contact and systemic, and selective and non-selective. So pre-emergent, just like it sounds, they target the seeds as soon as they germinate. They kill that seed. Post-emergent is something you put down after the seed has come up and after you notice it above ground, and it's a lot harder to control at that point. And then you have contact and systemic herbicides, and contact is what it is. It kills it right on contact, versus systemic, which goes down through which absorbs into the plant and goes down to the roots and kills it from the root. And then you have selective and non-selective. And what that is you'll have a selective herbicide, and that will maybe target one herbicide, like something you can spray over your lawn. It won't harm your turf grass, but it'll kill selective things such as crabgrass. And then you have non-selective, which is your glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup that most people are familiar with. And that kills pretty much anything green or most plant life. Some plants are pretty resilient to it and have built up an immunity. So don't be surprised if, you're not having as much luck as you used to with glyphosate. We'll talk a little bit about pre-emergent herbicides. Pre-emergent herbicides, they kill weedlings just after germination. The time is critical. It must be applied before seeds germinate. And they last for about 10 to 12 weeks here. So you must know what weeds you're targeting. And also they're not effective for all weeds. So do nothing to control established weeds or perennial weeds. They do absolutely nothing. And make sure you apply before the weeds come up. They're usually a granular and for landscapes and vegetable beds. And there's several different brands out there. They mainly control annual grasses and small seeded annual broadleaves. For lawns, crabgrass preventers are a lot of times they're included in there because it's a selective. It's a selective thing. It's not something that's in your typical broadleaf pre-emergent. There's many brands out there with many chemicals. So you can refer back to NC State for exact chemical recommendations, and that really depends on what type of grass you have also. So make sure you pay attention to that. But they can stunt your turf growth. So you might not, in the first couple of years, if you've got a newly established lawn, you might not want to go with the pre-emergent herbicides right away until your lawn gets established and healthy. Next, we'll talk about post-emergent herbicides. These are effective after the plants have germinated. They're applied to the foliage as a spray, and they're most effective on young, actively growing plants. Plant stress, drought, and cold reduces the effectiveness of post-emergent herbicides. They're not very effective on mature, blooming, or seeded plants either. So chemical control terms, we'll go with post-emergent herbicides. They're not very effective immediately after mowing. You want to apply between 60 and 85 degrees, but check the label for specific directions on that. Always read the label on any kind of herbicide, pesticide that you're putting down. Is very important to check those labels and read them thoroughly. For most, they need about 6 hours before rainfall or irrigation, unless rain fast. And again, check the label. The label will tell you everything you need to know. So some weed control strategies that you can use. Design based on life cycle of weed. So again, go back and you can refer back to this lesson if you want to, but design it according to the life cycle of the weed, whether it's an annual or perennial, and include prevention, cultural, mechanical, and chemical if necessary. And I say if necessary because if you're doing the other things correctly, you won't need to use a whole lot of chemicals. I'm not going to say you won't have to use any because I still have to use some occasionally. Weed control on annuals and biennials. You want to prevent germination, so mulch, pre-emerge herbicides, and kill when they're small. Cultivation, post-emergent herbicides, however you do it, make sure whether you use a scuffle hoe, try to target them and keep up with that. Management is going to be the best. If you have to go back and pull weeds once they've gone to seed and gotten huge, it's a chore. So prevent those weeds from seeding. That is incredibly important. And disturb the soil as little as possible. So weed control for perennials. Exhaust their energy reserves. Simple. Prevent seeding, hand dig, or spray systemic post-emergent herbicides. So the last thing we'll talk about is basically just designing your strategy. So one, you want to control your cool season annuals in November. And two, you want to control your season annuals in April. To control warm season annuals, you have to target those in March. So you would do a pre-emergent round in, say, I would even say in February in this area, go ahead and do your round of pre-emergent. And you can also control a lot of your warm season grasses coming up early in March. So that's it for the presentation for today. I want to thank everybody for watching this. And if you're watching it recorded, you can certainly email me any questions that you have. If you have any questions now, you can put those in the chat box. If not, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell to receive notifications. Check the description box below for the links from our class, our social media sites, and our evaluation for today's class, which is very important. We read these evaluations. I can't stress that enough. And we tailor our classes according to those evaluations. So it's very important. It helps us a lot if you would fill those evaluations out. And if you have any questions on how to approve any future classes, feel free to contact me by email. Have a great day and a great weekend. Thank you.